Hey everyone, welcome back from the weekend. Welcome back to your Daily Detroit. I am Jared Stays with episode 1387 of the podcast for Monday, March 25th, 2024. Today's guest, barchaelogist and journalist Mickey Lyons. We're going to have a fun conversation. Let's get started. So joining me in the Daily Detroit studio at Techtown is a longtime friend of the show, one of my favorite writers and people in Metro Detroit, Mickey Lyons. Welcome back to Daily Detroit.
Thank you, Jared. So great to be back.
I think your first time in our actual studio. You've been to the North End home studio. We've done remote recordings, but welcome to Techtown.
Yeah, we're getting fancy now. This is gorgeous.
Thank you. Thank you. There is so much to talk about around things you've been up to. The big focus of this conversation that I wanted to start with was you did this great piece in punchdrink.com. It's called Detroit's Third Shift Bars Were a Lifeline. Now They're a Dying Breed. Now, as somebody who has a bit of a history of a saloonimal myself, this really caught my eye because I feel like with the changes in work and everything else, we're also seeing changes in lifestyle and play. And so what kind of brought you to this?
It's definitely an idea that I have been tossing around for years now. It's been in my head, in part because I used to work at a third shift bar.
So for people who don't know,
yes,
let's define a third shift bar.
So the third shift in just about any job, especially manufacturing like we have here in Detroit, is usually the midnight shift. So 11 o'clock to 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. So the third shift bar would be the bar that caters to folks who are finishing their workday at 7 o'clock in the morning. Just like we finish our work at 5 o'clock, these folks finish their job and they want to get up and they want to have a beer and they want to have a burger.
Because they're normal people too.
Yeah, exactly.
And this appeals to me because I've worked my share of third shift jobs earlier in my career. It's a whole different lifestyle. There's almost like a different subset of people that you end up meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, a lot of it used to be, of course, back in the heyday, would be automotive workers working the plant. And that third shift, back when Detroit was cranking out cars 24 hours a day.
Graveyard.
Yes, the graveyard shift. A lot of what's left now, the remaining third shift workers, are first responders, so police, fire, EMS, and hospital medical care providers, because people don't stop getting sick or injured. So those folks are now the third shift workers that are holding down those third shift bars.
Interesting. So there has been a market shift. There is a lot less of that.
So much less. Yeah. I couldn't find any good hard data because, unfortunately, when you do what I do, nobody tracks the bars because no one thinks the bar business is important enough to spend a lot of money on tracking data. But I couldn't find any specific statistics on how many fewer third shift bars we have or how many bars are open less often. But anecdotally, I would say we're down at least half from 20 years ago, maybe.
So where are some of these third shift bars?
Well, the first one that I went to, we tried a few actually, and even according to Google, we would try to go to a bar at 7 in the morning. I know it's a tough job I do. We would
sacrifices for science.
Yes, and art. The things that I suffer for my art. We went to a couple. They were listed as open, not open, so don't always trust Google. And the first one we ended up was East Point Pub. So it's Jeffa off 94 and 9 Mile Road on the east side.
East Point makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
As somebody from the east side.
Yep. Just off of 94, right across from Ascension Hospital. So that's where we got all those pharmacists and first responders and doctors and nurses and all of that stuff.
Do you find these across the region? Are they in specific areas?
Generally, if you're near a hospital or near an automotive plant that has a third shift still operating, there's going to be a bar somewhere within 2 miles that is open at 7 or 8 in the morning.
Okay.
So up in Sterling Heights, they still have some third shifts going on. There's a place called Mackenzie's and I think one called Alibis that's up there. Honest John's in downtown Detroit still opens at 7 in the morning because of Detroit Medical Center.
Oh, that's right. Well, Honest John's back in the day, a lot of people listening to the show may not remember this, but it was originally right off of East Jefferson by Belle Isle.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh, so I went there. Story that I publicly admit that I went to establishments I may not have should have on the timeline. But Honest John's was in this place, Honest John's No Grill, and it was just past the Belle Isle Bridge, Grand Boulevard. Part of why it moved is because the clientele moved, but you had the Chrysler plant there, the supersized Chrysler plant just down the road with Connor. You had other things happening around there. And Honest John's is definitely had its roots on the east side for many, many years. And so it feels like forever because it was, don't quote me exactly, but I think it was around 20 some years ago that it moved. But I remember being in that establishment over there. I met up with some director friends of mine because I was working in television at the time.
Yeah.
And it was a raucous place. I mean, you knew Honest John's when he actually owned it in Midtown and then in time. Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Well, I learned something today. We're done here, Jer.
What are some of the themes that these third shift bars have that kind of tie them together?
Working class, no frills. A lot of the third shift bars that you see are those, 1950s and 60s built cement bunkers with low drop acoustic tile ceilings and just about no windows because when you're in a bar, you don't want to know what time of day it is. There's always a flat top and a fryer so that you can have not bacon and eggs, but burgers, fries, that kind of thing. And there is almost always a female bartender who takes none of your crap.
You can't take crap in this kind of situation.
No, not at all. A lot of these bartenders have been around long enough to know exactly who's going to try what and when. But otherwise, they are, the phrase heart of gold comes to mind, but they really are, bar mom and just very dedicated to taking care of their patrons.
Now, in your piece that I will link to in the show notes, you mentioned that Abix was once a third shift bar, which is down in, is that technically called Southwest Detroit?
It is in Southwest Detroit.
Okay.
I think it's the Martin, Michigan neighborhood, but it's Southwest. They're right at Michigan and Livernois.
Okay, I think they're on Gilbert Street?
Yes, Gilbert Street. So they're a neighborhood bar. They've been around for over 100 years, and they've been a third shift bar for almost all of that time, especially during World War II. The owner of the bar, the former owner, Manya, who was born and raised there, while all the men went off to war, she and her sister and her mother, I believe, or maybe her mother, I guess. Manya and her mom held down the fort and cooked for everybody, and that was the way it was until just a few years ago. Manya passed away a little bit less than 10 years ago now, I believe. And they still kept it open until, I would say, just about COVID really sort of killed the last little bit of their daytime customers.
Abix is a little different than the mid-century ones you kind of talk about because it is in a corner. It's one of the old school. It almost feels like a little slice of New Orleans because it's like a corner bar that the entrance is on the corner. I think there's an apartment upstairs, which is kind of similar to Nancy Whiskey.
Yep. Yeah, if you've ever been to Henry's in New Orleans in Uptown, it's very similar. Just that 100-year-old corner bar with an apartment where the family lives upstairs, and it's just been that way and still is.
What's something that you thought you knew going into this that you learned while doing this reporting?
That there is absolutely nothing wrong with doing a Jell-O shot at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
Especially if you have been working all day. But, I think I sort of suspected but didn't realize, especially when we're talking about the first responders out there, how much they really do need that decompression, just like we do, maybe even more so, that they need that decompression that is...
They're seeing broken people on a regular basis, like literally broken people.
Yeah. And, they don't get the chance to see the daylight and go hit the grocery store and all of that fun stuff.
I remember working graveyard shift myself for a while, and it was so hard to adjust to. It was very difficult because you end up just with a whole new set of friends.
Yeah.
Or a whole new thing. You don't really interface with the public life. The only grocery shopping I did was always going to be Meijer. Yeah. Because it was the only place that was open. It was very, very difficult. It's very difficult on me.
Yeah. When I was at East Point Pub, I talked to a group of pharmacists that were there. Their shifts, they work 8 days on, 8 days off. So actually, I think it might be 10 days on, 8 days off, something like that. So they come in on the last night of their shifts together. And this is a group of people that is very much trauma bonded. They are together because, like you said, they're on and off of work together. They're on the same sleep schedule like not a lot of people are. I did also discover, though, that there are a lot of people that really very much like working the midnight shifts. I talked to one fellow who'd been there. He'd been doing the same job for 10 and a half years, I think he said. And he's like, I love it. This is my normal sleep schedule.
Some people are just wired that way.
Yeah. And they deserve to have places they can go and hang out.
So what are some of the drinks or specialty things that you might find at some of these bars? Because we've always talked about like different cocktails and whatever. What kind of fare are we talking about, or what kind of niche things might we find?
So one thing that's, I would say, is a little bit different as far as what they're, drinking and eating than what we're used to is they're not hanging out for 4 hours after work like we might be on a Friday night, because they are still going to go home and get some sleep, and they might have a partner that's working a different shift. So it's usually like a couple bottles of beer, a couple of shots for sure. Generally not coffee, because they're going to go home and go to bed. I know I keep thinking, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. You're at a bar. You drink Bloody Marys. You drink Irish coffees. You drink that kind of stuff. No, they're going home and they're going to bed.
That makes sense because their schedule is completely shifted. So we wouldn't necessarily do that unless we're trying to gear up. Let me tell you, a double espresso. As I've gotten older, the double espresso is so much better to gear up for an evening out than an energy drink to me.
Oh, God, yeah, yeah.
I feel so much less pain afterward.
Right.
But, when I think about what I've had at bars like that, because I haven't drunk a ton on the third shift, but I've been to some of the places that you've talked about. I think there's also like a lot of ethnic niches. Like my first thing comes to mind is like a shot of Jezzy.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that until, I would say probably still now, a lot of those third shift bars are neighborhood bars, and they're still in ethnically concentrated neighborhoods. So there do not appear to be any left in Hamtramck, which is unfortunate.
That is, because if you think about it, they had so many plants, because I don't think Factory Zero is third shift anymore, the GM plant.
Right.
And of course, the new Dodge Lounge is named after the Dodge plant.
The Dodge Brothers plant.
Yeah, that was there.
Yep. Kelly's Bar was another one because it's right by American Axle.
There's been a lot of changes at Kelly's, by the way.
Yeah, there have. Great place, but yeah.
It looks completely different than I remember it. Like there was a time I visited it and it was like, whoa, this is, I mean, it's still got the similar vibe.
Yeah.
But they definitely put some work into it.
They put a lot of time and money into that. Yeah, for sure. When the previous owner, Brad, purchased it, he worked at American Axle. And he bought the bar that he used to go drink at after his midnight shift.
Are we losing a part of Metro Detroit culture in this?
I think we're losing a part of American industrial heritage for sure. It's not limited to Metro Detroit. Any industrial Northeast town, any Rust Belt town is going to have
your
this
Chicago's,
place.
your Cincinnati's.
There's still a couple right by the Jeep plant in Toledo that are still up and running. But even, shrimpers down in Louisiana are going in. Dock workers out in Seattle. They all have their own version of a third shift bar. But we are also losing that because of the labor shortages, caused by post-pandemic that I keep coming back to. There's just not as many people working in the industry anymore.
You have an industry that I've even seen it in like labor contracts and stuff where if we don't have to run a third shift, there's kind of a preference to negotiate kind of against that, as opposed to saying, okay, we're going to do a third shift, because it is very stressful for a lot of people. And sometimes in contracts, there's more money. There's all these other things involved.
Yeah, there are incentives to get people to work the third shift, but there's a reason for that, and it's because it's just not as desirable. Yeah.
So, Mickey, you're involved in so many things. And one thing I wanted to mention is that I saw this on your social media, and I wanted to bring it up. I don't know if I'm surprising you with this, but you're putting together a speakeasy fundraiser?
Oh, yes. Well, speaking of Hamtramck, I am on the Friends of Historical Hamtramck and as part of the Hamtramck Historical Museum. And our big fundraiser's coming up in April. So I am part of the group that is putting together a speakeasy-style fundraiser right at the museum.
So let's talk about the museum for those who might not know.
The Hamtramck Historical Museum is one of the smaller hometown museums in America, but it's also great because it's right on a main street, so it's not like a house museum. It's not a rich person's house. It is dedicated to the immigration history of Hamtramck. Because the city's inextricably linked with waves and waves of immigrants from different parts of the world, the museum itself celebrates that, and it celebrates American culture as seen through the different immigrants that come through it.
So today, you look at it, and there's a number of Arab communities. People might remember it being a Polish enclave.
Right.
I know my family, was in Hamtramck or also next to Hamtramck in many ways. They were Slovak.
Yep.
And so they were, connected to all that. But that's not just it, right? Because you think about Polish Cafe or Schrodex or whatever, and people get kind of like a mental map of Metro Detroit. And I feel like there's a lot more to Hamtramck's story than the most recent than the wave before it.
Exactly. Yeah. So you can almost go decade by decade through Hamtramck's history in the last 100 or so years. And, you've got, and I'm not going to get it accurately, but the different groups that have come through, Polish, German, Bosnian, Ukrainian, like you mentioned, Russian, Bangladeshi, Yemeni, just all sorts of different groups of folks, Albanian, different folks that are coming into the city.
Why has Hamtramck historically kind of always been that landing spot?
It's affordable. And it is also because of the way that it was built very close together with a lot of multifamily homes. So it's a great place to bring a whole family over before they can go off into the rest of the city and find bigger single-family homes for themselves.
I also share with people sometimes, you look at the streets of Hamtramck, and there are definitely sections of it that remind me of the books that my family has of the east side of Detroit. You go on the east side, you say that area past the Connor plant or whatever, and you see just emptiness. And I remember houses being there, and I also have books of my family, and a lot of those duplexes and things you can still see in Hamtramck and kind of see, like, this is how busy all of the city of Detroit used to be.
Yeah, it is this little 2.1 square mile pocket. We call it the world in 2 square miles, but also it is this pocket of what architecture used to look like, vernacular architecture in Detroit, built between 1910 and 1920, but lived in for many, many years by many, many families. Yeah.
So let's talk about this fundraiser, because I'm always for something from the 1920s.
Yeah. So the fundraiser we are having, it is ticketed entry. I believe it is $40 per person. We do have a VIP where we're doing a little bit of an archive show and tell from our archives. Because it's a speakeasy, because it's me, of course, there will be a bar. Cash bar, of course, because it's a fundraiser. We're also putting together a silent auction. So it'll be just a nice little gala, a little dance contest, a little costume contest, and just a nice way to get together and celebrate Hamtramck.
Yeah, and a good way to go out. I mean, I feel like a theme party is really important. If you're going to do a theme, like, go all the way in.
Right. And because Hamtramck's history was so vibrant in the 1920s especially, it just seemed fitting.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes, but when is this happening?
That is Saturday, April 13th. I believe that the event is 6 to 10 p.m.
Okay. See, that's the thing. And I'm going to say this as a note to all PR people and everyone else. Let's talk about events a little bit ahead of time, because when I get a note like the day before.
Oh, yeah.
And, the other thing is that it's good to give people some heads up to plan, because they have lives.
Yeah.
Mickey Lyons, thank you so very much for your time on Daily Detroit. I always appreciate when you come by, and, the door is always open for you.
All right. Thanks, Jared. Great as always.
If you enjoyed that conversation, a couple things you can do. 1, tell a friend about Daily Detroit. Word of mouth is the best way to grow the show. Number 2, if you can do it, think about it. Become a member, patreon.com/Daily Detroit. With that, I am Jared Stays. Thank you so much for listening. Remember that you are somebody, and we'll talk tomorrow.